Welcome everybody to another VITA Learning webinar. Today we've got Mr. Felix Pages. Hey Felix, how are you doing?
I'm doing fine. Nice and dry.
So far, at least for this hour.
Yes.
you never know with those hurricanes down in Florida. So
no, we were very lucky.
Yeah. So if you do have a power outage or anything like that, we understand. Or if something disrupts today's webinar, we know that you're buckling in and going down to your shelter that would be flooded soon, right?
Yeah, my basement would be an indoor swimming pool.
So today's webinar with Felix. Thanks for doing this with the everybody today. Appreciate it, Felix. Felix got a variety of materials to go over and concepts and best practices that he's going to train us today. The title is just material selection for anterior aesthetics, but you know, as most webinars go, we kind of talk about the things that are important. It's just a overall subject matter. So before we get going, I just wanted to remind everybody that your phones are going to be on mute. So if you have a question, whether it's within the webinar or at the end of it, we want you to type it in that question box, not the chat box, but the question box that is located on that panel. Go to webinar panel. Make sure you open that up, type in your question, and send that away. And then we will handle the question either at the time that you send it in. I will interrupt Mr. Felix Pages, or we'll wait until the end to answer your questions. Also, there will be a Q&A section at the end of today's webinar. The webinar will be recorded. So we actually record these. We kind of edit the bad stuff that I say out of the webinar to make it presentable, and then we post it on our VITA North America YouTube channel and other social medias, in which you can go find it. Felix has several other webinars as well that we've recorded in the past, and you can visit those as well. So please join us on that VITA North America YouTube channel. Give us a couple of days to post it, but we will have that. So Felix, a certified dental technician, is a 1976 honors graduate from the University of Kentucky, Lexington. Technical Institute, not very many technical institutes left. There might be even maybe 3 or 4 now or less. After graduation, worked with prosthodontic faculty at the University of Florida College of Dentistry, collaborated with Dr. Harry Lindeen and other members of the faculty. In 1978, Felix relocated to California with the Unitech Corporation. Many of you don't know that VITA North America, previously called VDent, was a Unitech dealer of VITA materials. And Felix was a course instructor for the VITA portions. The next year, Felix was promoted to laboratory project manager for all new products. During that time, Felix traveled and taught courses in many parts of the world, has presented in many domestic and international meetings, AACD and things of that nature, so high-end ones as well. Quintessence, I'm sure you probably were that one year, I'm sure, Felix, probably.
Which one?
Quintessence, did you ever do that one?
Yeah, I did the first ceramic symposium in London, believe it or not.
Yep, there you go.
Yeah.
So Felix is a founding member of the IFDC and was the first keynote speaker for the group in 1983, which is he just mentioned. He was invited to speak at the first Quintessence Ceramic Symposium, of course, and that goes back to 1984, what you mentioned.
Yeah.
He's also a founding member of the Claude Sieber Art and Experience Group. And among other recognitions, he's received the FDLA Crown Achievement Award in 2011 for his contributions to the dental laboratory industry. Felix is currently a key opinion leader for VITA North America and American Dental Group. Welcome, Felix, and thank you for doing this webinar for us today.
My pleasure.
So I am going to make you the presenter, and we'll get you going. And now we
show my screen.
Yeah, show your screen.
Okay.
All right. And now I will bow out, and I will turn it over to you, Felix.
Thank you, Jim. Well, thank you, everybody. I feel very lucky that this tropical storm, Nicole, that turned into a hurricane, went a little bit north of us. I kind of stayed up last night just to make sure it didn't make a loop and come down just to get me. But I went through Hurricane Andrew, and it pretty much destroyed my lab that I built. I bought it in 1990, the building, and Andrew knocked it to pieces in August of 92, and I didn't have electricity for 7 months. And so that was a horrible time. But we're much better now, thank God. So let's just hope everybody stays safe in the state of Florida and everywhere else this thing decides to go. And if you live in New York, you're going to have a nor'easter because of this thing. There's going to be a lot of snow and wind because of this. So it just doesn't stop. So, well, let's get started. Okay, Jim, I don't know what happened. Oh, there we go. So this presentation is going to focus on how we can reproduce the anterior teeth, but you have to kind of know what they look like and what it is that you have in order to get something to match easily. I mean, anybody can do anything they want to when you're doing these big arches. There's really nothing much to that. When it comes down to smaller pieces that you have to sort of be a copycat of nature, it's really, really difficult to do these things. Now, there's a lot of things that guide anterior aesthetics, and we'll go over a few things. So we're going to focus on pucks, like how they make the pucks, how do they make these guys, some of the occlusion determinants that will guide your aesthetics, believe it or not, and the material thickness that you need to produce some kind of color in all of these different materials, and what type of material are you going to use that most closely matches what a natural tooth does. Before I get started on that, if anyone's been to the VITA website, it's really resourceful. You go to vitasonfabric.com, like you see up top, and then you put what country you're from. It'll prompt you. It looks like you're in Germany, or it looks like you're in wherever. And then you go to lab, like technician resources, and you can download just about anything. Now, I like this magazine here. It's a digital magazine. It's called Dental Visionist. I forgot to put the dental in between VITA and Visionist. And if you click on downloads, you can see all the different languages, and it's from every year until they started in 2014. And it's really nice. And they have individual laboratories and dentists that can present their work in the Visionist, and they go through techniques and all kinds of tips, and it's really incredible. And some of the work that you see in there is breathtaking. So I advise everybody to go on the VITA website and just sign up, and you get this newsletter /Dental Visionist. I believe it's once a month. And so it's really good, and it's a way to keep in touch with what's going on if we don't get to travel as much. This is sort of what it looks like. This is one of the first ones, which was January of 2014. And so you can see, and it's totally free. So anyhow, let's get going with this. So material selection for anterior aesthetics, it's like what they say about it's the economy stupid. It's about the translucency stupid. And so the whole idea is that if you have a dental material that can blend in to what your natural teeth look like, you don't have to work very hard to produce a clinically successful restoration. If you see this small little picture that I have here, this is when Claude Sieber and Dr. Norbert Thiel and a few of us were trying to develop the Omega material and especially the VM line, the veneering material line, like VM7, VM9, VM13, da 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 da. And so Claude didn't like the word opaque dentine, and so basically the world transitioned from dentine to Willie Geller, who invented opacious dentine, only 5 of them. All of a sudden, every porcelain manufacturer is making 1 opacious dentine per shade. And that was not the original intent of purpose of the opacious dentines. They're supposed to be used for dark and shadowed areas. So where you don't have light getting into the tooth, like interproximal towards the lingual, etc., you would put a little opacious dentine there, and the light would come in and hit it, and it would not go grayish in the mouth. So you're boosting the light reflection. So when these people made opaque dentine for every shade, you have to remember there's not enough room for most things, especially metal ceramic, when we started, and everybody's using opacious dentine, and by the time you build up, you don't have room to put anything else on there. So you would have enamel, you would grind it off and grind part of the dentine. All those crowns looked really high in value. And so basically the idea is to soften the light as it's coming in, going through different layers. And by the time it hits a substructure, whether it's a prep, a coping of some material, that it sort of gets scattered around and it's soft. So if you have a real quick bounce back of light, that's going to look like a high value in the mouth. And so you have to kind of control that reflection and transmission. And with that said, of course, metals don't allow light to go through them. And so there's special scenarios there where you have to, my concept is the thinner you are, the more that the first layer has to look like the final shade. So you need to have opaques that look like a final shade, copings, frameworks, everything. If you're fighting for room, the very first piece, the skeleton, needs to look really close to the final shade in the position of the colors and the chroma itself. So what does occlusion have to do with aesthetics? Well, I have like a bulldog type teeth. I'm wearing them flat now. I'm 70. So some people just open their mouth open. They have a very steep angle of eminentia. And the steeper that angle is, the teeth just open and close. And you don't get any protrusive movement. So you don't wear anything. So a lot of people will have these beautiful anterior teeth when they're older, and you can see all the lobes inside and everything because they're not worn. So, and when you have a model, unless you're rehabilitating the patient and opening the bite up and doing all this business, if you're just trying to do a few crowns and you don't get to see the patient, you don't get a picture, you get a shade, I would say 90% of the time, the shade is the same from the gingival to the incisal, because that incisal 2 millimeters is gone. And so the teeth are flatter, and you just can't have all this translucency that doesn't exist in the natural teeth anymore, because they've wiped out that area where all the good stuff happens in the teeth. So you can have a beautiful dentine base color, just regular, beautiful, like an A2, whatever. But in that incisal 2 to 3 millimeters, that's where everything happens in these beautiful anterior teeth. you have, I'll show you later, these halos and these lobe effects, not mamelons. Those are on the outside. The other thing natural teeth do is they fluoresce. This means that they react a certain way to a type of ultraviolet light. Now, this doesn't mean that you have to go into a nightclub and your teeth are going to look the same as your natural teeth. Of course, this is part of it, but there's very few people that do that. There's some younger people, of course, and the problem is the materials that do not have fluorescence, they have a tendency to look gray in other light sources. Even outside, it's the worst. And so the whole idea is the materials, the fluorophores that are present in the cementum and the dentine are responsible for this tooth fluorescing. And it's basically a form of photoluminescence, and it absorbs an invisible light that we can't see, which is below 400 nanometers. And this is the light that burns you when you're out in the sun, etc. And so the tooth absorbs this, and it can actually, you can have a photoluminescence after you turn the light off for about 30 seconds, and the tooth will still look white, then it goes away. But the idea is that these fluorophores allow the teeth to become beautiful and bright and alive when you go outside or change light sources, where the teeth that don't have it, they just don't look right. And this is a problem with some of the early lithium disilicates, etc., that don't have any fluorescence whatsoever. And they're always going, quote unquote, gray looking in the mouth. And that could be a combination of factors, but one is that they don't have any material that can be put in there to make it fluoresce. So there's different types of fluorescent light. So you have if you look over here on the left, it says UVC, to my left. This is short wavelength UV, and that kills germs, etc. I have a machine in a UV light in my air conditioning unit here, and it wipes out all the bad stuff. Nothing can grow in there. Then you have UVB and A, which are the black lights, and they sterilize a little bit, but these are the ones that give you sunburn, large amounts of this. And those are nanometers from 3 to 400. And then the visible spectrum lights that you can see, colors, etc., are 500 and up. So the visible light in artificial light sources, you can see everyday objects, but they don't kill germs or anything. So the visible spectrum is, you've heard that guy, Roy G. Biv or Viv G. Yor, backwards. So red light and infrared light are really long waves, and the UV lights are really short waves. So true UV is below 400 nanometers. And you can buy certain black lights, quote unquote. I remember in the 70s, we would go to this Spencer gift store and everybody would buy these black lights. And you walk into the dorm room at the university and everybody was glowing in the dark, the t-shirts, the white, the dust. Unbelievable. And so they have lots of different little lights now that you can get and test the strength of the fluorescent effect of the teeth. And you can use several materials that VITA has to put underneath the ceramic, such as the Fluo Intense powders from the Lumax, or the, I think it's called, I'll show you in a second, on the VM9 and 7. So if you look at this chart that someone made up, I have no idea, but he did a lot of work, and thank him, whoever he may be on this planet. And so you can see from the left, on my left, Suprinity, Emax, Enamic, Mark II, Zirconia, VM9, and VM13. So you know the Suprinity has a very, very good natural fluorescence, just like the Mark II blocks. So the VITA blocks that have been around since, 1985 or 6, those have always, to me, have set the standard for mimicking natural teeth. just have to know what they look like. And one of the big problems we have in the lab industry is that nobody really knows what a material is supposed to look like. So let's say you're buying a puck of some zirconia, 8.2 or whatever. Well, at what thickness is it an 8.2? I mean, you can't make everything the same thickness, and it's really difficult to try to figure this out unless the lab does the homework. And I hate to say it, but labs are lazy in doing anything that they can't, if they're not going to make money on it because the margins are so tight, they don't really want to do it. And I think they have to do it because it helps improve their predictability. And that way you sort of learn the material by force. So you can see here on the zirconia, the YZ, it's really doesn't fluoresce at all. And one reason is that none of the fluorescing agents that I know of, except one, and I don't know if they're putting it in there now, thulium, they burn out at a fairly low temperature, so you can't really put that where you center the zirconia. Maybe Russell Giordano, who may be listening, will have an answer to that. The effect liners on the VM9 and VM7 originally would fluoresce. And so you put this on top of the zirconia coping or the structure, fire this to a sheen, and we never take this, sometimes you have to bond the zirconia. I use a regular clear material to do the bonding, and then I fire the liner at a lower temperature, because if I go too high on this to like 980, like they want you to bond it to 980 with some of these porcelains, you're going to burn out the fluorescing agent. Ed McLaren would do 2 bakes of liner, one at a much lower temperature, the original one to bond at 980, which I really haven't tested that, so don't take my word for it. I always go lower. So here you have this this little chart, which comes from Toso. Toso is the company in Japan that makes a lot of the zirconia for dental, and they have like ZPEX, and the ZPEX Smile, which is I would say the more translucent. Like ZPEX would be sort of like a 4Y zirconia that I'll explain in a bit, and the ZPEX Smile is a little bit more yttria, which causes it to be more translucent. And the original one at the top has a very little of this thulium material, which causes this beautiful fluorescence response at around 450 nanometers. So that would really help. They could add that, but it's very expensive material, and I don't know their reasoning for not putting it in everything. So I bought the little light on the right at a body shop, at Advanced Auto Parts. It said $9. I go, heck, I'm buying this. And it says 305 nanometers. So it works great for detecting air conditioning leaks and bodily fluids and blood. And it says scorpions right on the right on the handle. But I couldn't see any reaction whatsoever from some of the materials that are supposed to fluoresce. Then I kept reading and reading and reading. And of course, I found out that you need to be around 360, 350 to 365. That you get a real good UV response. And what I did is I took a natural tooth that I have in a jar. I have a bunch of them. I don't care about the germs. And then this is a zirconia crown, and I just put a blob of the Fluo Intense White on the crown. And I fired it, and lo and behold, under this light, they look really close. And so that does work pretty well. And so the teeth with the fluorophores react to this 365 nanometer light, and you can get that in Amazon. There's prices range from all over the place, but plan to spend about $35 for this little light. It works pretty good. What they use now, some dental handpieces, expensive ones are coming with UV lights built in, so that when the clinician is finishing, let's just say a composite filling or resin filling or whatever, when you hit it with the UV light, it may flash over a margin a little bit too much. And by putting on that UV light, they're able to finish, they can tell where the margin is and they can tell where the restorative material is. So you don't get any flashing. And that's how they're using UV lights on the clinical side, not just to take the shade of the teeth. They haven't got that far yet. And so VITA sent me some powders called Power Wash, and I saw no reaction. And I told Jim, hey, this stuff doesn't work. And then I got the other light, and wow, you see the difference? Because that's what the materials that they put in there to produce a fluorescence works. This already we have in the fluo intense powders in the Lumex and the liners in the VM9. So if you have either one of those two powders, you can use I like the white one on the lighter shades. Put that a little coating so you can actually see it. And you can actually put the light on it before you fire it, and you can see a dark spot if you didn't put enough powder on there. And so I covered enough so that it's like a miniature little wash, not a rough one, but real smooth. So it should encapsulate the coping. So when you look at natural teeth that have all these things that we can't see because we're not in a black light environment all the time, you can see the contrast in the incisal edge. You can see these beautiful blue color just above the halo on these anterior teeth. This is freestanding enamel. That's all that is. And the halo is the light exiting through this fine edge. I remember in 1984, we went to Japan to work with the Shofu Corporation because they were going to switch. Unitech was going to had to switch from VITA to Shofu, and I got to spend time with Yamamoto, which was really incredible. And he made these halos by grinding at a 45-degree angle, starting from the outside towards the lingual. And the problem with that is that it really weakens the incisal edge. But anytime you cut glass to a fine edge like that, you always see like a regular glass pane will have the silica glass. It's sort of like a greenish halo to it or whatever. But we don't want that. We want to do that with color. So basically, can you guys see my arrow? Let's see, right in here, this halo is the same as the dentine up here. So when you're building this crown up, you can put in these lobes, then you can put like a translucent bluish. If you haven't done a lot of these in the first bake, don't worry about it. Do it on the second bake. Just do cut a few lobes in there, and then put the blue, and then build up with the enamel, and then the halo. You just put the same dentine that you did up here. And that's how you reproduce that effect. It's easy to do, and it's very natural. The problem is when somebody comes in there with a bleach shade. So I have different colors. I have Palm Beach white, Beverly Hills white, whatever, and they don't want anything. I thought I did a great job once, and I had this beautiful little blue things right here. And the first thing that lady did with these long nails, she said, "What's that little dark spot there?" I said, "Well, that's how do you explain that to somebody that?" And she said, "Well, I don't want that in there. I want everything white." So for a lot of those cases, I just build everything up in dentin, and I don't even bother with the enamel. For what? So that if you have unbacked enamel, you're going to have more translucency. In the big problem I see with a lot of these zirconia crowns and these big zirconia cases that have to have a natural color is that the framework, quote unquote, the zirconia that you're going to put the porcelain on top is way too high. And there's no way that light can get through that the same way that a natural tooth does. So what you want to do when you photograph these teeth and you bring it into your computer if you have Photoshop or anything like this, you go to your contrast slider and you turn the contrast up more, and you can digitally see these cuts a lot better. If you have too much light, you can't see these. So it helps you determine where you place all these special effects by just moving the contrast slider over left or right. I don't know which way it would work in each software. And so with that said, you have to say, okay, is my porcelain going to chip if I put it on the incisal area? Well, if you slow cool it and you design your framework right, that really is minimal. They've changed a lot from fast cooling big arches and and really piling the stuff on. You have to have support for some of the porcelain, but you also have to be lenient enough so that you can have some aesthetic results. So most of the zirconia frameworks, the incisal edge is protected. It's all the way in zirconia, and there's no way to develop these beautiful, soft blue, translucent enamels when you have a framework that goes all the way up to where this halo is. So a lot of times the anterior aesthetics, it's determined by your framework and even how you center the zirconia. So here you can see this beautiful shape of these teeth. Always you see this soft blue. I mean, they're perfect. And you have the inner incisal space. Now, by looking at this, the only wear that this guy is developing is right on the incisal right here. He's chipped his own teeth. And so that has to be worked out when you're getting ready to place the bridge in the mouth. You got to make sure the occlusion is right, etc. So if you're having difficulty trying to figure out a natural setup, just like the old denture teeth from VITA, the laterals would be different than the canine and the centrals. And these are very thin teeth, so they're almost more translucent, so they're a little bit lower in value. Remember, the more translucent something is, the more gray it's going to look. And so the central incisor and the first bicuspid are almost identical in shade every time. The canine obviously is a thicker tooth, and it needs a little bit more chroma, and they're usually leaning towards a yellow. And so yellow is a bad word to use around patients. So you might want to say L, something like this. And these teeth are softer because they're thinner and they're more translucent. So what I use like the normal enamel on this, and then I could bring in a slightly lower value enamel, and I could use the same dentine or the same zirconia. If it comes out nice, the zirconia color takes care of all this area, and then the enamel should take care from here to here. So that's the next big question, is how do you know what your zirconia is supposed to look like? So when you have all these teeth, these absolutely gorgeous teeth, if you just reduce the light a little bit, you can see a lot more detail. So if a doctor sends you pictures, you have to be careful how bright these things are, because you can change the shade, as you can see from these anterior teeth to these. And so this is the correct color. This looks higher in value. So you could go from a 3M1 to a 2M1, and there goes the ball game. So you can take good pictures, transmitting them over the internet. If you're doing big cases, that's fine. If you're trying to match a single central, that becomes an issue. I don't think you can get close, but not perfect. And of course, as your teeth age, you see all kinds of different goodies happening. And you have to really narrow it down to, like, what is it that I'm trying to reproduce? So if you're trying to make a single central, zirconia may not be the material of choice, because the translucency is there, but you can't put any internal structures if you're hell-bent on doing full contour zirconia. If you want to layer it, no problem. You can do this with the Lumax or the VM9 and other porcelains. The whole idea is if you know about refractive index and how the teeth bend light, the refractive index of natural teeth is about a 1.6 and zirconias are up around 2. And so there's a mismatch there. Zirconia is a lot more reflective. And if you have, and some of the 5Y zirconia, you can get pretty close to the teeth. So if you've ever seen finished zirconia crowns and you're patting yourself on the back, how close they look to the shade guide, when it's outside the mouth, you say, wow, this looks pretty darn good. And then once it goes into the mouth, they are automatically much brighter than the teeth. And that's because they reflect a lot more light. So the natural tooth has the enamel with the hydroxyapatite crystals, which are like little perpendicular to the dentine, these little rods. And the light goes in there, and it's almost like a clear straw filled with table salt. So those are the hydroxyapatite crystals, and that makes the light scatter and go everywhere. When you have zirconia, the grains are so tiny, I believe they're like 0.2 of a micron for some of the 3Y zirconia. And they get a little bit bigger as you go to more cubic zirconia, which will allow a little bit more light. The grain boundaries are also super, super tight, so that the light just can't go in and move around like it does on a natural tooth or a glass ceramic crown like a lithium disilicate or lithium silicate or whatever you want. I mean, you could do a feldspathic veneer and a VITA block. They're absolutely stunning if you have the right tooth structure behind it. And you can fire these VITA blocks with VM9 or Lumex on it, and you're not going to warp them or anything because the melting temperature is super high. And that's what my go-to material is when I have a decent tooth structure. I always fall back on my VITA blocks, and I can mill them and cut them down, set stain them, do whatever the heck I want, and they never move. And that's a beautiful thing. Even if you use glass ceramic crowns, that's a low fuse, and you have to be careful. You bake them too many times, you can make them a little too translucent. And I haven't found that to be a problem with VITA blocks at all. So let's look at some of these things. What are the determinants for material selection? I always call them targets. What's your target? How translucent is it? Can you see stuff inside? Are there lobes and grooves in there? What was the tooth in an accident? Was there a crown or a veneer on the tooth before? Because sometimes they don't tell you anything. I can't tell you what color the prep is on a model. We can see some darkness on some digital impressions. How opaque is your tooth or your target? Are there crowns next to the new crown? And what kind of crowns are they? Very few patients know what the heck they have in their mouth, and a lot of times the doctors don't know what they have in their mouth. The old dentist that did it. What is the prep color and the translucency? Do you need a material to block out the prep color? Will you be able to bond or cement the crown? All of that is determined by the amount of enamel left on the tooth. So there was a clinician that was doing zirconia veneers, and they were falling off. And I'm just shaking my head like, okay, if you fire dentine on the inside and etch it, you have a chance. But if there's no enamel left, or you've had 2 or 3 type of crowns, there's very, very poor enamel left on the tooth to really get a good bond on a veneer. And so it's always better to make a determination that you may have to do a full, like a crown instead of a veneer, if there's not enough good enamel left. I think the best bonding enamel is like the first 0.5 millimeter, and it goes downhill from there. And there's some people that'll swear by what they do, and that's fine. I've had to redo a lot of those. So the difference between a natural tooth and a metal ceramic crown, or even a zirconia crown like a 3Y, is that the tooth is really an active filter. It does all kinds of beautiful stuff to the light. And the second that you block the light out, as you can see this black coping here, this metal coping, as soon as that coping touches the prep, it blocks the light to the root. And the root is what transmits the light into the sulcus. When the light gets transmitted into the sulcus, the tissue looks beautiful and pink. I remember when I first started this in 1976 up in Gainesville area, that this one doctor would take a plastic provisional out, and I would put in a PFM crown, porcelain fused to degussa metal, the gold, the good stuff. And he would seat it, and all of a sudden the margin would look gray, and he would take that Explorer and start jamming in there. And I said, the margin's fine. I said, the gold is blocking the light. That's what that. And then he takes the crown out and puts this jet provisional in there, and the tissue and everything lights up beautifully. And so he says, well, it's over contoured. I go, it's not over contoured. So I said, grind it all you want, and I'll make you another one. You can pay me for it again, but it's not over contoured. And it's a light transmission problem. In fact, Geller developed this technique where he used opacious dentine underneath the tissue, the metal part that slid if the tissue was subgingival. He would put the white opacious, I believe it was 575, the number on BMK 68, so that the crown that slips under the gum is pink, is white, and then the gum would look pink. Not perfect, but a lot better than if you try to quote unquote stain or color the neck to match the cervical part of the crown. It's the part that slides underneath the crown had to be more reflective to make a beautiful pink tissue. So what do we have here? We have VITA blocks, which are ground with esthetics and other machines. Glass isn't milled, it's ground with diamonds. Zirconia is milled with carbide burrs. Ambria is pressable. This is a lithium disilicate like Emax. Saprinity is lithium silicate, and it's also ground with CEREC and other machines. And then you have your VITA XT and ST. They've got that backwards, I'm sorry, because super translucent to me is the most. XT extra, it's just a little bit. I told the guys from Germany why, if they knew who Extra Man was, they didn't have a clue. I said, what about Superman? Everybody knows Superman. I go, yeah, because that's the top. So the 5Y zirconia should have been the ST, the super one, but who cares? We all know what that means now. And so these 5Y have a higher cubic phase, which would be like if you have a 3Y zirconia, the original one is like crushed ice or shaved ice. This means that it's so tiny that, why is snow white? Because the light hits those little crystals and it reflects back and leaves its fingerprint, which is white light. You can take that shaved ice, you melt it in water, and you make an ice cube really slow, and the light will go right through that ice cube. So it's something similar to this. When you make a larger particle, like a jigsaw puzzle, you could have a 3Y zirconia, it would be like a million gazillion pieces of zirconia, little grains, and the 5Y would be like 100,000 or something. So the light could just shoot right through there, and it makes it more translucent. But you have to be careful because once those things go, if you grind it wrong, it'll break really big. So that's why you can only do it on single units and small anterior bridges. You don't want to be messing around with 5Y zirconia on a big cases. So these are what I like to use for some single crowns that I can modify because I can grind them and put whatever I want, Lumex or VM9 on it, and they work absolutely beautiful. Now they have the Trilux Forte. So Forte means strong in German. I mean in Latin, not four. So this 4 layers should have been Quattro, not Forte. And so anyhow, it doesn't matter. These are very nice blocks. The Mark II is just fine. So if you're going to layer, you can just use a Mark II of the right shade, and you can build it up with your ceramic. Remember, if you have good 2 structure left, you don't need a lot of reduction because the labs are always saying, I need more room, I need more room. And what happens when you ask the doctor that, he's digging away into the enamel, and the porcelain, you're asking the porcelain to do everything. If if you take too much enamel off. If you leave some enamel and you put these veneers on it, they disappear because a tooth is the one that's handling the light. It's doing most of the work. And so I don't like a lot of reduction on veneers. Just have to be careful when you do them. So here's a typical veneers that I did with VITA blocks. And these are veneered. I just put a little putty and I jammed them on a tray there. That's it. And then that fires on there. And this is you can see the model. You can see the bluish and the halo from this is actually VM9 with the, I can't remember the name of the blue now. There's too many names. And here you can see them in the mouth. This is a day that we put them in, so he's a little irritated. You see his lip here that's dry? This fella had acne, and this is Accutane, which is a medicine for acne, but it really dries you out. They took it off the market because it had a higher suicide incident, so that's why he's like this, not that we tore him up. But you can see how close you can reproduce these things with minimal room. Here's another one. The old crowns that are chipped. We take a shade. I take some stains and I paint it on the shade guide to try to reproduce some of these goodies here. Then here you see the preps, and you can see there's two different colors on the preps. I'm not going to worry about that. That's just two. What am I going to do there? Here's a stump shade. We measure the provisionals to get the right length. Here's the shells. Here's the buildup. Here they're fired on a putty. You can also fire them on sticks like this, like the VITA pegs, that's what I do now. And you just grab the furnace tongs and grab them proximally and push them in. That way you don't ruin what you did, like if you have to characterize it a little bit. And these are 0.6. So we clean up everything, use a sealer, bonding agent, whatever the doc does, dries it. Here you have this depth finder, and you hold the veneers while you just tack them on. That way they don't move. And then we go ahead and finalize the cure. And these are super gingival. There's still a little cement that needs to be cleaned up here, but I had to get out of there. But they look really nice. Characterized veneers for a 60-something-year-old patient. I don't have the most experience on Ambria because I don't have a pressing furnace, but I do have some friends that are using Ambria and they're quite happy with it. I have used more Suprinity, which to me they're like almost twins. So what is Suprinity? Suprinity is lithium silicate glass with 10% zirconia reinforcement. And it's basically a joint project between the Fraunhofer Institute, I don't know if I pronounced that right, Ducera and VITA. And so these people are government people, and then they help business people develop products. So they've got millions of these Fraunhofer Institutes. They got them for everything you can imagine. So VITA and them came up with this neat material, which is partially crystallized. And then it's easier to mill. It doesn't take as much of a toll on your milling machine and your spindles and your burrs. And then you final crystallize them in the furnace. And they come in translucent and high translucent. I wish they had one that was a little bit more opaque, and maybe one day we'll get that. But if you have thin room, sometimes they're just a little too transparent, even if I crystallize them a little bit longer, whatever. But I have done quite a few crowns, and they're really beautiful, but the conditions have to be right. So I use the high translucent if I have a lot of room to work with. If I don't, I use the regular translucent. And this is the Amann Gierbach machine, the holder. And this is a combination of Suprinity crowns and VITA blocks that we placed. This is a 12 holder holder. And then we put it in there, and then it mills all these suckers out. And you've got a good days ahead of work to get everything dialed in, make sure the margins are perfect. There's always some conflict between Amann Girrbach and VITA, where you have to use this holder or that holder. And so what milling strategy and this milling strategy. So if you just go to Emax, go to Ceric, Emax, and then you can mill out these fine. That's what Mo tells us from Amann Girrbach, and we've had very good success with the milling strategy. Don't use the one from Amber Mill. Use the Ceric Emax. Okay. So when I get these out, I use a Cardiflex disc from Cardinal. It's a centered disc. I have a sponge with water and I cut the sprue. And this is what they look like. I can use and polish these like crazy if I want to. And you put the surface texture in it now. If you're just going to do, this is like a OM1, and here you can see this is after I crystallized one in the furnace. So it's amazing how it changes. This is an exaggeration, this big gigantic diamond, but what I'm trying to tell you here is don't use a real tiny little diamond and don't use a high speed. Use a bigger diamond, because when you use a small diamond to cut the sprue, it can dig in. And then I just use those gray pre-polishers that VITA sells or used to sell, and then I polish this however I want. And I made some that are super clear. See that? And so you can see the difference between how thin it is here and then how thick it is here. Then I use platinum pins, and what I do is I bend them so that they conform to the inside of the ledge. This is how they come in the box. I bend them and I shape them like that. That way they don't dance around on these pegs. I don't like my crowns moving around. There's no need to put the quick die or whatever you want to call it, Instapeg. So I just take a hemostat and I bend it. And then when I put it in here, you can see the wire underneath there. And then I crystallize this guy, and that's what they look like. And the original cool temperature was 680. You don't want to do 680, so I blanked that out. The cool down is 500. No issues whatsoever. And then I build them up with VM11. So this is a new material that is, the expansion is matched to the saprinity material, which is a lithium silicate, and it's a little bit higher than zirconia. That's why you have to use VM9 for zirconia. You use VM11 for saprinity. You cannot use Lumex on saprinity. It won't work. Some people will try it. Go ahead and do what you want, but I know what's going to happen later. Now, if you try to put internal colors using the old internal liquid, you cannot. This will not burn out properly because this fires like around 760, really low. And so you need to use the regular modeling liquid to paint in the effects. If you're going to use the internos, which I don't use those anymore, I just use the Accent Plus colors. And here you can see the crowns after I finish building them up. Now let's get into the zirconia. For single teeth, full contour zirconia is really difficult, and there's too many conditions that have to be met in order to match a single tooth. Honestly, ask yourself, do you know what the zirconia you're using is supposed to look like? I don't. They don't send a crown inside every box of a puck and say, look, when you fire it, this thing needs to look like this. I have no idea what it's supposed to look like. And you can talk all day about perfect firing temperatures and all this stuff, but I've seen too many different situations, different looks with the same zirconia fired in different furnaces. So you have to learn your material. You have to do some homework. On some of these zirconia crowns, I have some that are 0.5 millimeter, Some are 0.7, some are 1, 1.2, stuff like that. And so you have to test it a little bit. And once you get, this Geller calls it the sixth sense. So once you know your material, you sort of say, oh, I've seen that before. I got to use this for that. And that's just what a technician that's busy matching natural teeth does. So if the puck, a multi-layer puck, how do you know it's going to look like the natural tooth? So let's just say that your life depended on matching a single central with just full contour zirconia. That would be a tough one. The puck transition layers need to, this nesting, I'm not too versed on this, but I get on Team Viewer and I sort of try to tell them, okay, I need this, I need that. And to me, it's a lot easier to build up a nice little framework and layer it. And it's a lot more, you can control the aesthetics a lot more. So the value, quote unquote, of the zirconia puck is critical. So the translucency of the 5Y would probably be your best scenario if you're trying to just do a single anterior tooth with zirconia. And not all 5Y zirconias from all manufacturers are created equal. They're different looking. So you have to know what your go-to material is and what it looks like for when you go take a shave. The thickness of the zirconia, the chroma is going to change. So if you have something, it's like, how thin can I make this? So if the thinner something is, you don't have enough thickness or material to carry the color. So that you can see when you have a molar pontic next to a bicuspid that's barely reduced because they don't want to take too much tooth structure off. And then you see a totally different look. And of course, the heat absorption is totally different. That's why sometimes when you fire your porcelain or you glaze, the pontic doesn't glaze the same as the abutment because you have air all around the abutment and it's thin compared to a pontic, which is quite thick. So you need to have a really slow bake time for whatever you do. When you have a big, thick piece of zirconia, you have to give it plenty of time to heat up to be able to accept the glaze or the porcelain. The single units will heat up a lot faster. I do like to fill them up with the dye material, the refractory dye material, Instapeg or whatever you want to call them. There's thousands of them. When you're cooling down, you don't want the abutment to cool so fast compared to a pontic that can stress the connector. The sintering temperature can also affect the chroma, and you guys have to do your homework. You need to sinter several samples with slightly different thicknesses so that you can, sort of like what the bottom line is, you can improve your predictability if you've already fired a few crowns of samples to get to know the material better. So this was from Dr. Burgess at the University of Alabama. It's pretty simple. That's why I put it in here. You get your powder from Toso, you put it in this bags, and you have pressure from all sides. That makes your best pucks. In the beginning, there's a lot of companies that didn't use this isostatic pressure on all sides, and your pucks are not the same density, and you could have warpage and all kinds of stuff that happened in the early days. I don't know. I think most manufacturers are doing it the right way now. So you press your blanks, you pre-center the zirconia, you mill it out, and then you do your final centering in your sintering oven. I had a lab that I lent a beautiful VITA sintering oven to, mine, and the guy said that it was making little white spots in the zirconia, that there was something wrong with the oven. And I said, okay, how did those little white pieces get inside your zirconia? Because they're not on the outside, they're inside. And so that's just an excuse to, I have no idea why somebody would do that. The furnace is working perfect. Now, looking at all these webinars, I've learned a lot here, and this is a patent application from B&D Dental, which is, they own the patent on the multi-layer zirconia dental blank, they call it. So this is a multi-layer zirconia, and this was done in 2017. You see that? That's not that long ago. And so you can see what a simple schematic, I just copied and pasted these, how they applied for the patent, and everything is good. And so these guys have done a lot of work on multi-layer zirconia. And you see, this is a typical multi-layer zirconia puck. I don't know if it's so typical anymore because I've seen, I don't even know how many layers anymore. And I do know that if you have multi-length teeth, like if you're trying to do these big cases, the gingival crest, depending on the surgery or implant placement or whatever, they may not be all the same length. And so when you're trying to get the same color on all the teeth, because a lot of these people want everything to look the same. It doesn't matter if it's a lateral or a canine or a central. They want these quote unquote smile cases to look the same, every tooth to look the same. Okay. And so what happens is when you're trying to nest these things, you may not be able to get them to fit in here. The neck of a central would be in here. The lateral might be too short where it would go through two transition layers. You might twist it and do all these angles and everything else. And then the enamel layer, in this particular puck, it takes up 35% of the block, the dentine layer 35, and two transition layers at 15. And they change color little by little. If the preparation is very thin on the gingival, this color here is really strong sometimes. And they look opaque because some of these pucks use different zirconias within the same puck. And this is very dangerous because you could have 3, 4, and 5Y zirconia within the same puck. There's a limit because there could be tension built up within these layers because the firing temperature is, back as I remember, 3Y zirconia fires different than 4Y or 5Y. So I don't know. I mean, I like to stick to something that's more basic. So the VITA choices are basically a gradient, a natural gradient, which most of these pucks are. But it's how you lay these things in that makes a difference. So if you're doing the big smile cases and you're doing like a 1M1 or whatever, OM1, things like that, you want something that just is a gradual change. You don't want to have a Trilux block that looks like Neapolitan ice cream. Things like this. You want to have a smoother transition. That way, you don't. You can hide the difference between a central canine. You can have them all look the same like they want. And of course, these are really nice looking pucks. I'm using them now for a bit. And so we have the 3Y, 4Y, and 5Y. You have to be careful. You don't get them confused. So the translucency of the original YZ was 32%. This is the really strong one, but it can weaken because it absorbs moisture. It's hydrolysis. Then when you go to HT, the same thing. They just reduce the alumina content a little bit. And then with the ST, they increase the yttria and reduce the alumina even more, and you jump up to 46%. And the XT is about 50% translucent. And it can be pretty darn translucent. And you can fiddle with the firing temperatures just a little bit. So in some of these, you can see a nice transition. You can see the difference between the T, which I don't think they make anymore. The HT should go away. And these are the two workhorses. ST is the workhorse, and XT is a soft translucent one for some anterior units. That's how I work it. And so it's hard to read all these, like the yttria content. It's 4 to 6%. This is 6 to 8 and 8 to 10. I don't really tell you exactly what's in there. Look at the temperature difference. See, 1530 on the ST and 1450 on the XT. And so if you're dealing with another puck that may have different zirconias in there, you have to be careful of that. In the old days, we would dunk them in liquid, this acid-based liquid, so that it would penetrate in the zirconia, and we could get some pretty decent color. A lot of the really high-end technicians still color their zirconia. You can do a brush, you can use a little darker color in the fossa, all kinds of things that you can do. A lot of labs don't want to do this anymore because it's a pain, but you get better looking results. And again, you have to be careful because no matter what you do, if you go too high in sintering this, you'll burn the color out. And this is from the VITA book, which is the same as the Zircon Zone book. So Enrico Steger is the one that started these, I call them avatar teeth. I mean, these guys really know their stuff when it comes to doing all this. And you do have to dry these out before you fire them, or you can cause trouble with your furnace. Even the water-based ones, I've tested it with a pH meter, and it still reads acid. I just don't know if the acid is strong enough to hurt the furnace, but I burn them out. I have a heat lamp, and I cook those out of there. So this is a white zirconia that was colored using the VITA liquids. And you can see the pink. It's not the best photo. You can see the pink for the tissue, and then of course the shade that we painted on here. And then this is the first bake with VM9 at the time. We break up in smaller pieces, and you can see the tissue porcelain. This is the G4 mixed with GC with clear with the window material, at least 50-50. Then once it's baked, I smooth it out and I paint it with the stains, the accent stains. This is the pure G4, and then most of this is clear. Now you have this zirconia underneath here that's more bony, and so this is why you get this look. And this is the anterior segment. These are glazed. And then I polish them a little bit more. When it's an older patient that are cancer patients, they can't clean very well. A lot of times you need to fill this in a little bit. Doesn't make it as good looking, but you can rinse everything out with a water pick. Some of these people are really compromised. So this is a good little article from Dr. Burgess at the University of Alabama. And he had some nice photos of the grain size of these. So you can see how small the grains are, and the boundaries are so tight that it's very hard for the light to go all the way through. So it's mostly reflected. And these materials are what they call birefringent, which is double refraction. And that's why they look, once you put it in the mouth, you have a black background. The teeth are allowing the light to go through, and this stuff is just bouncing it out so hard that you can't control that. And that's why you need to layer some porcelain on some of these crowns to reduce that and have a little light scatter and not so much pure reflection from that zirconia. The 5Y zirconia is a lot better, the more translucent one. So here you see the VITA XT, and I have like 0.5 millimeter of space. You can see the preps underneath this white dye stone. And these are test ones. I have all of these in the lab. And so I fired them a little bit higher than what it called for, and I got this beautiful look. And I can stain them and do whatever. And that sometimes when you have the 5Y, you can actually get get too gray if you're not careful. And so the whole idea is if you're doing a single tooth, you might have to do a couple to make sure that the value is the same. The key to the whole thing is figuring out at a certain thickness, like 1.2 mm maybe, what this thing's going to look like if it's fired properly, and you can have one fired like 20 or 30 degrees higher or lower. Like B&D Dental has a chart. They also have, by the way, if you color your liquids, they have 3 different concentrations of liquid. They have 80%, 70%, and 60%. And if it doesn't come out looking like when you do your tests, like the shade guide, if you want it more chromatic, you use the 80%. If you want it less chromatic, you use the 60. And so they have a real nice article on that you can go to their website, and they have some interesting literature on that. So you can get the translucency right on zirconia to match single anterior teeth. Just the best way is to layer some ceramic on it. When you're doing these big cases, not a problem. You can do like an A1 or OM1 or 1M1. And what you have to think about is the difference in the gingival crest. If you have a multi-layer puck, this may not fall. This will fall in the transition layers, but it won't fall into this first layer. And if it's too short, it won't fall into the enamel layer. So you may have a smaller tooth that'll be monochromatic from top to bottom. So it's all about the nesting and how you can work on all these things. So these are friends of mine that I taught them how to use Lumex material. And this gentleman is from Brazil. His name is Adriano Baldoro. He works at Midwest Dental Arts in Palm Bay, Florida. And he's a very talented guy. He told me that he doesn't blot with tissue, that everything that he builds up is just with no tissue. And I watched him work one day, and I mean, he's really good. He's from Brazil, and he does some training for GC and Shofu in Brazil, in South America. A very talented, very nice person. And he sent me these pictures, and he's going to send me the clinicals when the doctor sent it to him. So he did this. I mean, very good shape, everything. Here's another one. This is a good friend of mine, Gisette Ortiz. He studied with Dr. McLaren at the UCLA school, and this is a full upper arch done with Lumex and zirconia. This is the ST with Lumex, with a tissue, porcelain, and he uses all the effects, the translucencies, everything, and he has a really good sense of humor too. So he also works at Palm Bay. They have a group there that's quite talented. And this is obviously a little polished. I mean, it's absolutely beautiful work. And so all these guys, I had a little hand in helping them understand the material. There's thousands of people that are so talented, they don't know the materials. And once they get to know the materials, they can do much nicer work. Here's another good friend of mine. He's up from upstate New York, John Bilikowski. He's like my brain trust. I go up and ask him questions, and I let him criticize whatever, and he's very good. And I can't even remember what teeth he did here, but these are all zirconia. This is a ponic, and all of these are characterized teeth. You can see the difference between older teeth and younger teeth, and these are really good. So he does some work for the school up there, and maybe I'll get him to use a little tissue porcelain here if the doctors let him. But anyway, here's another one. When it comes to framework design, this is what I do. We use the PMMA material, we mill it out, we try that in the mouth, and we can see if we need to, how we need to do the framework, cut it back, do whatever for the porcelain, and where we're going to put the gum. And these are mostly cancer patients that we work with here in Miami, and they're obviously they don't have any movement of the lips because they've had oral surgery, and implants are placed in their leg or their arm, and then they take a piece of bone, and it's quite complicated. And so we take this and I fire the liner material, and then I go ahead and build up and start doing the gum. And then this is a first bake. And then I do a second bake. You can see up here with the incisal, and here we characterize the gum again to make it look like real tissue. And this is VITA ST framework with VM9. All of this in here is surgery. So she can't manipulate her brush, and these are super gingival. I mean, the implants are above the tissue level. So we tried to blend in the gum as close as possible, and we got a nice result. Very happy, thank God. And I want to thank you guys. Now we have some time for some questions. And thank you very much for attending. Okay.
All right. Thank you, Felix, very much. I will go ahead and take it over, remind them of a few things.
Okay.
So let me grab the screen back and readjust my screen here. All right, so everyone, those of you that have asked about the CE, we will use your registration information and send that to you or give you the directions on how we do that. So that will be coming out in a couple of days. The workshop, a reminder, the workshop was recorded, the webinar. So you can go back and revisit Felix's hurricane program. And then those will be posted. Give us a couple of days. They'll be posted on our VITA Learning North America YouTube channel and other postings, social media as well. So come visit it. This is some of the VITA social media that we employ and use to help communicate to all the customers and the market in general. If you need to get a hold of one of our local reps, either U.S. or Canada, we can get you that information. This has it all, so when you go to visit the webinar online, you can pause anywhere you want and take note. We do have additional programs coming up, so we are scheduled all the way to the end of this year. We are working on the 2023 programs with some new topics. We're going to do a little bit more remote workshops. So we have, in the past, we've done 3-4 different remote hands-on workshops where we just actually send you the materials, and then you will work on it along with the key opinion leader, the speaker such as Felix, and he'll guide you step by step. These can be a day, 2-day. We've even done them 3-day long. So look for that in the future as soon as we get all those topics together. This is the help desk line here. Again, you can revisit this on the webinar, the recording on our VITA North America YouTube channel. And then the questions themselves. So let us take a look at the question board and let us see what we can come up with. So what do you use? What do you use for the coping? If the coping shows through the material. So what do you use if the coping shows through like a floodlight effect? like we used to have the problems with the PFMs in the past and
Yes.
the opacious stentin, but now we're doing zirconia. What material do you use to control that?
Well, like I said before, when I pretty much know what thickness I'm going to have before I start. And if I know that I'm going to have, let's just say if I'm layering porcelain on a framework and it's, let's say, Lumex, I would use the opaque dentine instead of the dentine in an area like that. Or I would fire like a liner material and already start putting, like I could use a violet stain, depending on where the headlight is through. You have to know what area of the tooth it's going to shine through on. And so to lower the value so you don't see it. So the thinner you are, the more that your framework has to look like the final shade. And so I would take that zirconia coping or whatever and take it down as much as I can. I've taken them down to 3/10 in the white stage. Actually, you have to do the calculus because it shrinks. And I don't like grinding on the sintered zirconia except with a rubber wheel filled with diamonds. And I take that down a little bit. I've taken them down to 3/10 in some areas. And then when I put the bonding bake on it, I can use any color that I have in the Lumex kit or the VM9 kit to paint over that area to make it look like what the final shade's going to be. I've done, if it's in the incisal area, I've used the opal material, the bluish, or a violet stain, and set the stain, and then I build it up. So it's easier to see when you stain something. It's very hard to stain an opaque looking core and make it look decent. So if you have 3Y zirconia, it's very hard to stain to make it look that way. Now that we have the different pucks in the value ranges, so if you have 1M1, 2M1, 3M1, 4M1 now, okay? If my target's a 2M1, I'll go either to a 3M1 or a 4M1 and mill it out. So that area is lower value already. And then I can use a lighter dentine up top. So there's more than one way to skin a cat there. It's not, I'd rather have the color or lower value before I start. You just have to know what area is going to stick out. I could help you a lot more if the margin's really thick, the cervical area, if it's really thick and you can't take it down anymore, then you got to use a zirconia that looks like that cervical color. Or use white zirconia and paint it with the dyes. That's what John Bilikowski does. You can't even tell which teeth are there with all those colors in it. And he's been painting since day one because, sometimes if the puck doesn't look like the tooth, there's no way you're going to match it. And this way you can keep coloring it until you get the initial product, the framework, to look as close as possible to the final color. That's how we do it.
All right. So we got a kind of a comment question. So there's more and more they're hearing about laminate made out of zirconia. And have you ever done a laminate veneer made from zirconia?
No. In fact, I just replaced one that they sent it to the lab 8 times to do another zirconia veneer. I mean, I just don't understand. You can't etch it. You can't bond it. And there's a big lab in California that's pushing those. But I've never, I mean, if you're going to quote unquote bond it, it better be fresh enamel. And the only thing that sticks to zirconia is MDP resins. Or you could fire a wash of dentine on the inside, like a super thin wash, and etch it. And that way you could bond the zirconia, but it has glass in it. You just need to blast it with like 30 pounds of pressure. You can't use much more. If not, you weaken the zirconia like crazy. Now, if you're going to use a 5Y zirconia, cubic zirconia, like a high cubic, and you blast it too hard on the inside, you can weaken it by half the strength in like nothing. And so I don't know why someone would want to do that, because it'll never be as good looking as a VITA block or a glass ceramic crown or a milled Suprinity or a milled Emax cat or whatever you want to do, as long as it's a soft translucent look. Let's just say that you had tetracycline stain or West Texas teeth, and there's no way that you could get the color out. Then you would need something to block out the color. And that would be where they would say, maybe I can use a zirconia veneer there to block something out. I don't know. I've seen one and I had to do it over for the doctor. They kept
What are you
coming
saying?
over.
West Texas has special teeth?
That's what they say. They're called West Texas teeth. Al Payne, the old VITA rep there, we used to do a lot of courses. The first time I went to the training lab in Dallas, right outside of Dallas, he said, got a patient coming in here with West Texas teeth. You're going to have to match that. I said, what the hell's a West Texas tooth? And he says, well, it's got all kinds of colors in it, like iron and fluoride or whatever. And they're really colorful teeth. And that's what a West Texas tooth is. You can ask the in Texas.
So, when you have the framework, question is on the incisal edge of your framework or your coping.
Yeah.
What do you use to break up that edge, that definition of the tip of your coping? What material do you use to kind of blur that, so you don't have such a separation between a very opacious framework and your incisal third?
Well, it depends on what the throw is between the framework and the incisal edge. So that what I typically do in the white zirconia, I take a diamond and I groove it a little bit. You know what I mean? I groove it so that the zirconia just doesn't stop. It's kind of like opened a little bit with like lobes in it. And then when I build it up, I just use dentin all the way to the end. And then once I do the first bake on it, I look to see how it looks. And if I can see a sharp line of demarcation, then I'll take and smooth it out, and then I'll color it with some stains. What happens is, if you're going to stain or color something, the surface has to be smooth, because the stains will, if you try to do it on the gritty porcelain, it just doesn't go right. So I smooth it all down, and then I do that. And I always build up my crowns from the lingual. So I do the lingual incisal edge first, and then like the natural tooth, the dentin goes up in the middle, and then the enamel wraps around that dentin. And so if I have zirconia on the lingual, I have to make sure I bring that up, but it's not perfectly a straight line. I can notch that a little bit with a diamond before I center it. Now I get Graham at ProLab does most of my frames, and he's uses a library, and I have to call him every once in a while. I go, hey man, don't send me these things that look like a razor blade. At the end there, and I don't like grinding on the zirconia once it's cooked. If you do, you have to use slow speed and water.
What do you, all your pictures, what do you use for a camera? Do you have a special camera you use, or?
Yes, I have a Canon 5D, which is the oldest one. It's a really good camera. It's got a full-size sensor, which means a 35 millimeter film is 36 millimeters wide by 24 tall. So that sensor is what they call a full-size sensor for 35 millimeter. That increases what's called your dynamic range from light to dark. So you can have the best camera in the world, but if it has an ACP sensor, a small one, or APC, it's 24 by 19. So the light converges in too much. There's some great cameras now. You know, your eye can't tell the difference between, after 4 megapixels, you can't see the difference. So I got a 500 megapixel camera, but that's if you're going to do a billboard on I-95 or something. You want to blow it up. But the higher the megapixel, mine's just 12 megapixel. The key is the lens. You have to have a really good lens. So in the Canon series, you need to have the L series lens. It's got a red stripe on it. So the difference between the regular macro lens from Canon, 100 millimeter telemacro, f2.8, and the f2.8 L series, which is the top of the line, is about $1,000. So you can get one for like, I don't even know how much now. I've had mine for a while. And then I use a twin flash. So I can bring it in like this. I create a field of light in front of the work so it doesn't pop out. If you're photographing teeth, take the first shot and hit info, and you can see the lights. If they flash, that means it's overexposed. You want the flash to hit the line angles of the teeth, and you want the patient's face, the head to be tilted down a little bit. So the light comes in from the cervical a little bit more, and that way you get away from having the highlights right in the front of the teeth. The other thing, if you're taking clinical shots and the patient's laying down and there's fluorescent lights on the ceiling, you need to turn the lights off, or you're always going to have two lines across the teeth, whereas the reflection of the lights from the ceiling on the facial of the patient's mouth. It's terrible. So you have to have an office that's set up. I usually take the patient sitting down. That way, and I don't want any light. I shut the blinds, because you can have the best flash system in the world, but if the light's coming in from the outside and you see a reflection, it's going to capture that. So it's not just about the camera. It's how you set it up. So the L series lens from Canon is good. Nikon's good. They're all good. And I use a twin flash. Don't use a ring flash. That's ridiculous.
All right. So you had mentioned zirconia, the chroma changes on the sintering temperature.
Yes.
So the question is higher, more chroma, or lower, more chroma, or vice versa?
Lower, more chroma, higher, less chroma.
Okay.
If you go to the B&D website, they have, Faro makes what they call the PTCR rings, process temperature control rings. They look like a lifesaver, and you calibrate your furnace with that. So they're adamant about what they call set temperature and performance temperature. So the set temperature is what you put your furnace to be. The performance temperature is what it's really cooking at. And so what the Faro people that make these rings, the German company, they sell a 20 millimeter ring on the outside, the hole in the middle, it's like a lifesaver. It's 10 millimeters. And they sell different temperature ranges, okay? So you measure the outside diameter with a really good digital caliper, not some cheap thing that you get. And it's 20 millimeters outside diameter. It might be 19.9 something. With each batch of these rings, you get a piece of paper. And it tells you, starts at 20, it'll say 19.9, 19.8, all the way down to whatever. So that when you fire your zirconia, let's say you're firing the ST at 1530, it comes out, you put a ring in there while you're cooking your zirconia, not by itself. Everybody says, oh, I'm just going to cook it by itself. No, put it in there with your zirconia, right on the beads, or right there. When that thing comes out and cools after a day and a half, don't touch it or you're going to get it stuck to your fingers. And you measure the outside diameter. So it starts at 20, and let's say your final reading was 19.48. You go down the paper and you go to the right, it'll say 19.48. And that temperature it could be 15, 20. So you're 20 degrees low, 28 degrees low. You see what I mean? And so that tells you, and then you just bump up your temperature. And that's how you really, it's like when we fire porcelain on zirconia, I'll take a couple of crowns and I extend the incisal edge, like with Lumex. Lumex fires at 760. So if I want to know exactly that clear, I use the clear, and I want it to be clear, and I cut little notches on the incisal edge of the clear, so that if it goes to 760, if the clear is clear and it has the little sharp notches, I'm right on the money. If the notches round off too much and it's clear, I'm too high. If the notches are sharp, but it's not clear, if it's foggy, guess what? I'm too low. And so I do a visual check of the real porcelain. So I try to reproduce the thermodynamics in the muffle. If you put your crowns on a tray and just lay them there, the heat comes from the top. They don't cook the same. If you have it on a peg that's loose without putty, it'll affect it a little bit. If you have it on a peg with putty, it insulates the crown more. And you see, this is critical when you do, let's say, Soprinity. A lot of people say, well, I'm going to put the putty because it's moving, blah, blah, blah. No, you want the pin, because what happens when you reach a certain temperature, like 840, to crystallize it, if you have insulation inside the crown, the outside gets cooked, it crystallizes it different than the inside. And that's no good. So I like to have this peg, this platinum pin, so that the heat gets all around the same. So the inside and the outside of the crown are affected equally by 840, and the crystallization is more normal. I've seen too many where they crack, and it's like, well, did you fill this with putty? Yeah, I did. Well, you're not supposed to fill it with putty. I mean, and so that type of stuff, you have to be practical about it. Just like if I have a huge zirconia ponic next to a tooth prep, where there's a hole inside the crown, right? I shove it full of putty, because when that thing goes up and it cools down, the ponic's not going to cool down, but the crown will really cool down fast unless you have the putty in it. It'll never cool down as fast as slow as the ponic, but you don't want it shock it, because the ponic will stay hot, the crown gets cooler faster, and the connector gets stressed. The wall that holds the connector is usually where the break is. And so I try to minimize the temperature difference on the way down, and by filling those up with Instapeg or whatever you want to use.
So speaking of Soprinity, someone is using it every once in a while. They get for example, a translucent. It comes out very gray. You know what might cause that?
You have to see what thickness it is at that temperature. Those, sometimes when you go too thin, there's not enough material to carry color. And that's why I think we need something a little more opaque. Because you could have 3 Soprinity crowns or 4 anteriors. You can have a millimeter reduction on the laterals. You could have a millimeter 2 on the centrals, or even less. And what happens, they'll never look the same. So you're dependent on a lot of those crowns for good tooth color support. The more translucent a material is, you need the color of the tooth underneath it to help it. That's why you need to try instruments and have some samples. That's what, remember those nails, the lead press-on nails that I mill out? Take a lead press-on nail. I know they'll look at you funny, but who cares? You go in there and you take and scan those and mill them out of a VITA block. So I have some like at 0.6, 0.7, I have one at 1, and I have one at millimeter 2. And since they're half round, a nail, it's almost like half a crown or a veneer. And so when the doc does the prep, I have those things glazed, just like a basic shade. And then I put the try-and paste and I slide it right there on top of the prep and underneath the gun. And I can see exactly what it's going to look like. So it's just improving the predictability. That's how I did those other veneers that are super thin. You got to have something that's already like that you can try it in. And so that's a working shade guide, like a working mold guide or whatever. This is like lead press on nails and you just stick them on the prep and underneath the gum with the trying cements. And you can say, well, look, I need a millimeter reduction here. This looks really close, or half a millimeter. It's too thin. I can see the prep under, that's it. That's when you get a real ball buster doctor. You know what I mean?
Very nice.
Yeah.
So, Jan from Texas has a question for a all-on-4 type case. What kind of VITA material would you use? What zirconia? ST?
Yeah.
All right.
Now, is she gonna put porcelain on it or not?
She didn't add that to her question.
Okay. Here's what happens. If you have the HT material, which is 36% translucent, that really is like, you need to have the porcelain on that. It's too opaque for it to look good. The ST, if you want to do a full contour case, it can look pretty darn good when you're doing all the teeth, because you have a certain value. And that's, like I said before, you got to test these things. So if you have let's say your target's a 1M1 and it's pretty thick, if it looks too bright, you might have used a 2M1. You see what I'm saying? When you do a full arch, because the whole key is knowing what that zirconia is going to look like when you finish. Now, most people aren't going to complain if their teeth are whiter, but you could take a 1M1 and it could be awfully bright in the HT. Okay, so the ST would be a much better blend.
Yeah, Jan mentioned that no, she would not add porcelain to it.
Yeah, ST.
All right. All right. So, how thin have you milled and polished a veneer? Not out of zirconia, but say, for instance, VITA blocks. How thin have you gotten them?
0.6. Well, the veneer itself, like 0.4. And then I put just a little enamel with some goodies on it. And so the total thickness is 0.6. That's
Okay.
And that's about as thin. You can't go much thinner than that. You just
All right.
can't.
And then last question, on how do you control your texture, your surface texture? Do you use diamonds to score it, or your glaze thickness, or a combination of both?
On zirconia?
No, probably on any. It's not specific on the material, but.
So what happens if you're trying to get some type of surface texture on zirconia? You need to do the little pericymata or the scratch marks in the green stage. And then what you do is you take the rubber wheels with the diamonds after you cook it, and you polish the line angles and the high spots, and you leave the little texture in the middle for the younger patients. Otherwise, I use a 20 micron plated diamond with a sharp point on it, and I go over the crown there. It's I use an 842R, which is a regular cylindrical diamond, and oh come on, I used to know the name of those. It used to be just for dentists, and I got Brasseler to make these for a slow speed handpiece, regular handpiece. And it's a pointed red stripe diamond. Any red stripe is 20 microns. And then I do it with water. I don't ever cook anything dry. I cut anything dry. I have a sponge, and I push it down, and I grind on it, dip it back in the sponge. That way I don't breathe the dust or anything like that. And it keeps it cool. If you try to grind the zirconia after you cook it with a diamond, that's not a good idea.
Yeah. Because
you're going to fracture it at some point. You're creating some really bad things there. So it's always better to do that. In fact, Cardinal Dental sells a diamond that has like, it's not plated the whole way. It's like, it looks like a swirl. And that is made to do the texture on the green zirconia. Now, McLaren is the pro at texture, putting surface texture on zirconia. It just takes him a long time, and the lab guy said, well, we ain't going to do that because it takes too long. But he does a good job with that. He did it in his lecture at the FDLA meeting, the steps that he went through. So basically, you need rubber impregnated or diamond impregnated rubber wheels or silicone, whatever the hell it is. And I use like 3 grits, like a coarse, a medium, and a fine. And then I use those little spiral wheels that are also diamond impregnated. On my occlusal surfaces, I never put glaze on those. I use the old VITA accent glaze Fumo 3, which is dark brown, and it's real gritty. And what you do is, if you use a decent anatomy in any of your milling libraries, I take water and I load up a little brush and I just scrub the whole crown. It looks awful. And then I take a dry brush and I wipe everything out. So the only place that it stays is exactly how a natural molar gets stained in the mouth. So I put it on, wipe it off. So if I have little pits and little things like that, and I can control it. And then what I do is I have Graham cutting literally a microscopic finish line on the facial and lingual all the way around. And then I put the glaze on, and it stops at the cuss tips and all the way around the marginal ridges, just below the marginal ridges. So nothing on the occlusal table has glaze because the glaze will wear off. Now, even though this zirconia, it's much better tolerated when it's highly polished than with a glaze, because the glaze itself can break down and it'll start to wear the enamel. And that study was done by Glidewell and Gordon Christensen, where they were trying to compare the surface of their brand new Bruxier crown at the time, which is basically a 3Y crown, but they removed the alumina, okay? So by removing the alumina, you increase the translucency just a hair, but not to the extent of adding more yttria, you got me? And so what happens is, once they glaze those, Gordon did a study there, and you could see the glaze could wear off as easy as early as 3 months, I think it was. But it's in the Glidewell study. So we prefer to have a decent multi-layer zirconia so that the enamel rests, the occlusal table rests where the enamel should be. And then on some cases, maybe we'll do that next year. And I use some color on the inside of the fossa to pigment the fossa. That way I have a light-dark contrast and the fossa looks deeper. Because if you just have regular color the same, every cuss tip, fossa, everything the same, they just don't look as real. So you need to change that up a little bit, and that's how we do it. So we glaze the outside, and it's okay to just polish the whole zirconia thing. On the posterior, most labs, they just, well, we're just going to polish it. But that doesn't mean the color is going to be right. So a lot of times you have to do the glaze and a little coloring. I don't like to use the word stain anymore in front of patients. I always say, well, I'm going to have to go color this crown a little bit. If you say, I'm going to go stain this crown, they say, wait a minute. What do you mean stain? What do you mean stain this crown? I'm paying good money for this crown. I don't need to stain it.
I don't need no coffee stains.
That's right. And
so I got one more question that was slipped in. What do you think of the nano portions like Mayo? How have you used them? Are you working with them?
I've used them. I've never measured one to see if they're really nano. But people seem to like it. I don't know. I'm not enamored by anything like that. I saw a case where they tried to paint pink tissue on a 6-unit anterior bridge that needed pink tissue. So they did it out of the same color zirconia. It was like an A2, A3 shade. And they took the pinks that they have to try to paint the tissue. And I'm like, what in the world is that? It just didn't look right because the zirconia is too opaque. The tissue is translucent. And so if you're going to do that, you need to set up a condition to where you have freestanding tissue porcelain, which will look a lot better. You can't just have, look, if you put any stain on top of an A3 and try to make it look like gum, it's not going to look like gum. It might get close to being pink, but I just don't see, You have to have a white zirconia where you don't color there. And I can see pink on top of white that would look more like tissue. But still, the thickness isn't enough to make it look like a real. What I do is I've got a friend of mine, he does dentures. So I got him to make little samples of Lucitone 199, characterized Lucitone, this Lucitone, that Lucitone, all that crap. And then what I do is I take like the whole flange of a denture, and then I mix my Lumex or VM9 gingival porcelains, G1 through G6 on VM9, and 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 on the Lumex, plus the clear, minimum 50-50, no less. And you can get, we do a lot of cases where the patient might have a lower fixed case with ceramic tissue and an upper denture. Okay, because the lower denture will move too much, so they'll do a implant-based here and a full denture. It could be implant-supported denture, but that's acrylic, and so we try to match the ceramic with the acrylic. And it works perfect, but you got to use 50 to 75% clear. And when you do those, you use the deepest parts. You take like a little bit of the straight gingival porcelain, like say G4, and as you go from the papilla up towards where the tooth is, you have what's called free gingiva, which is really translucent. Right around the tooth, you can actually see the tooth through that. And then I take the paste stain, the pink, the dark pink, and I take a needle and I put the little veins after I smooth out the tissue, and I set that. And then I fire my last coat of clear on it. And that's where you can see some of those tissue that looks like it's got the veins going through. And that really works nice. But it takes more time to do it.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Felix. Any last minute comment or anything you'd like to say to everyone before we?
Well, next year I'm going to try to do a few of these in Spanish. So if you know anybody that speaks habla español, I will do some of these seminars. And you should tell Jim what kind of seminars we can do for you. I want to do one on like posterior anatomy, like the different libraries, stuff like that, and how to color some posterior teeth and do it fast so you don't mess around too much. And stain and glaze one, surface texture, stain and glaze, something like that. And I'm going to try to put some more friends of mine to show off some of their work.
Nice.
You know what I am now? I'm called a digerati. Do you know what that means? A digerati is a person that explains technical information, an expert at divulging technical information. That's known as a digerati, and that's pretty much what I am right now. I think I've reached my peak manually, you know what I mean, with the crowns. I've seen some of these younger people that are so phenomenal. I'm sitting there like, wow. The difference is 30, 40 years ago, we would have to make our own colors and try to figure out how to do all this. And now they have such a beautiful palette that they can choose from and do all these wonderful things that you just can't even compare it. So nice. It's really good that we're progressing in that way. So anyway,
All right.
thank you very much, and I'll see you guys early next year.
Yeah, thank you, Felix. Yeah, we have a lot to look forward to in 2023. So yes, as Felix mentioned, if you want to get a hold of him or even contact us here at the help desk, let us know what maybe your areas of interest would be for webinars.
Great.
So I want to thank everyone for joining us, and wherever you may be, have a great day. And Felix, thank you again for all your time and effort. A lot of good things you went over.
Thanks.
And this will end today's webinar. Thank you very much.
Ciao.